In this video I will be going over the settings in MX bikes and kind of explain what they do and give some general advice on what to use depending on your skill level. I should have timestamps on the video so you can just skip around if there are some specific settings you want to see, but more than that, let's get started. Yeah, so first we have the basics. We have lean, throttle, brake, rear brake, clutch, rider front back lean, and rider left right lean. The only thing that to really notice is leaning is gonna be the turning, and these two leans are gonna be your rider leaning on top of the bike. And if you have the arrows in this direction, it means that your game input is going to be the same direction as your controller input. And I recommend you to have these arrows on all these three, and not like me. The second thing is brake and rear brake. Brake is going to be your front brake. Depending on if you have combined brakes on, brake can also be your front and rear brake, whilst the rear brake is always only going to be your rear brake. Combined brakes basically says if this brake input is going to be your front brake or your front and rear brake. So if you can see when I have it off, you can see down here I only have my front brake. If I turn it on, both my front and rear brake are on. Min is going to decide how far you can push the button before the rear brake is activated. So you can see I have it on 50%, and that means I can move this input 50% before the rear brake starts to apply. Max is going to be the maximum rear brake you can have. So if I have it on 100, you can see if I do 100% input, the brake is going to be 100%. If I lower this to 50%, you can see my maximum rear brake input is going to be 50%. Now if I would give some general advice, is to have combined brakes on, because you just get a little bit more braking power. For min and max, my general recommendation is going to be to keep it around like 100%. So you keep your rear brake very similar to your front brake input. Now this could be very personal, what you like, so just mess about a little bit with it. But if you are new to the game or a beginner, just use 10-100, because that's a very like a general setting. Rider lean tracking, I'm not really sure what it does, but it seems that it removes these inputs, so don't use that. Then we have direct lean, which is a important one. Direct lean is basically kind of how direct your lean input is going to be. So having this at 100% means that it is going to be more direct, but in turn harder to control. And if you go lower, your input is going to be less direct, but you're gonna feel that you have more control. Now having a higher direct lean will allow you to turn the bike quicker and move it around quicker and scrub quicker, but in turn it's going to be harder to control and harder to be smooth. So my recommendation for this is going to be 50%, especially if you are a beginner. I think if you are a amateur or pro, you could go up to like 75, so you stay in the area between 50 and 75. But I very strongly recommend you to stay at 50% if you're not really comfortable with the game yet. Now here we have a advanced tab, and if you click this thing, you see a drop down and you can choose advanced settings for all your controls over here. Dead zone is how much input you have to do with your controller before it registers in game. You should try to keep this as low as possible, so around like 3 to 4% is usually good. But the important thing is that you don't have any input when you are not touching your controller, which is often referred to as stick drift. Now I sometimes have just a tiny amount of stick drift on 4%, but it's so tiny that it's okay. But you can see if I lower this, you can see I have a little bit of stick drift because I'm not touching my controller and the game registers an input. So just go up 3%, it kind of goes away. But sometimes for me I still have a little bit of stick drift at 3%. And it doesn't make a huge difference going from 3 to 4%. So just be a little bit safer if it's just 1%. Linearity is a little tricky one, and one I don't think too much of the community actually knows what it does. You should see a drop down if you hover over it. And it actually does kind of a good job explaining what it does. So very simply, what happens is if you go lower, you're gonna feel more precision in the first part of your input. So if I just move my controller just a little bit, while you're gonna be less precise at the later part of your input. And of course the opposite goes if you go higher. So this graph kind of represents what is happening with linearity. So you see you have your controller input here and your game input on this axis. So if you go lower, this red line, your controller input is going to be translated into a lower game input in the early part, but it is going to increase at the later part. And the opposite goes for if you put it higher. And this gives the feeling of having more precision in the first part of your input, but at cost of the later part. Then we have smooth. This basically just smooths out the input. So you can see 10%, not a lot happens, but if we go to 100%, you can see that it is smoothing out the input. So you can compare it to my controller. I do really quick on my controller, but it still smooths out the input. Now I don't recommend having this on your lean. Gain I like to think of as kind of increasing or decreasing your input. So for example, if I lower this down, you can see I am putting my stick all the way to the side, but the input is only 66%. And the opposite goes if I just move my controller like halfway and I increase it. You can see that now the input is a lot higher than I actually inputting on my controller. Gain on your lean is kind of an interesting part. A lot of riders like to go down 1 or 2 clicks just because they feel like they have more control. If you lower your game, you're generally gonna feel that you are a more precise input, but you have to move your stick further to input the same amount of input into the game. And if you increase it, you're gonna have to move your stick less to lean the same amount. I would recommend to try to have it at 100% as much as possible. I do not recommend going higher than 100%, especially if you are not as good at the game. But if you want to lower your gain, do a maximum of 2 clicks on this pointer right here. So either 100% or at the max, like the max amount is 2 clicks down. Generally I would recommend to play just 1 click down, so 98.7. Of course you can go up if you feel like, now of course you can go up if you feel like that's more comfortable. I find it more comfortable playing with a higher gain, but again, same rule applies, just go at maximum 2 clicks up. So moving on to throttle. Dead zone, the same thing applies, just so you don't have any input when you're not touching your controller. Linearity, just keep it at 100% so you get a very good feeling of the throttle. I don't recommend to have smooth, but if you really want to have your smooth on your throttle, you could have like 10% max, I think, just to get just a little bit smoother throttle. For gain, you can see I have a very high gain. That's because one of my controllers were broken, so I had to increase the gain for it to be able to have a maximum amount of throttle. And then I just played with it ever since, but definitely recommend to have 100% on that. Now, brake, dead zone, same thing applies. I don't know why I have it on 2%, but the same thing applies as for all the other inputs. Linearity, I have it on 80%, also for some reason. I'm not really sure why I have it, but what this is gonna do is that you're gonna feel that you have more control during the first part of your braking. But if you don't really know what you're doing, or you're not really familiar with the game, just keep it 100%. Smooth I would generally don't recommend, because there's no real reason for you to have a super smooth brake. So yeah, I don't really see any use for smooth on your braking. So gain, I have it on 120%. It's probably just a value I just picked and just have ran with it ever since. But generally go 100%. One thing you could do is go 1 or 2 clicks down, so that it is harder to kind of lock up the brakes. As for rear brake, dead zone is not gonna matter since it's a button. Linearity is also not gonna matter since it's a button. Now smooth, this will always be checked because it's a button. So I have a 10% press and 0% release. I want the rear brake to feel very direct, but still have just a tiny bit of smooth, as you can see. It's still very direct, and I want the release to be very direct, because kind of the only times I use the rear brake is like mid-air, when like brake tapping. So I just want the rear brake to be very quick. Now I don't see any reason to have a lot of press on, nor a lot of release, since you should not use the rear brake input for braking generally. You should mainly use your front brake for braking and slowing down. So I don't see any reason why you would have a lot of press or release, but it's all personal preference, and I think it's an input that doesn't matter too much. Gain, just do 100% or just 2 clicks down if you don't want it to lock up for some reason. I like it at 100, that way it just locks up mid-air and get the bikes turning better. Clutch, so this is not gonna matter, smooth will always be checked, but I have all these at 0%, so I don't have any smooth on. You need to have both of these at 0% if you use quick shift, which I use, but if you don't know what it is or you want to use it, just search on YouTube. More than that, the only time you're gonna use the clutch is on the start, and then you're just holding the clutch in, and you want it to release very quick so you can get going. And gain you can't actually move, it's disabled. Rider front back lean, dead zone, same as all the other inputs. Now it's a little harder to see because you have this box with this blue kind of box in it, but you can see it's kind of not centered. So I just go up a little bit and that seems to do it. Linearity, I don't see any reason to change, because you don't want to have more control on the first or later part, since most of the time it's MX bikes, you either lean all the way back or all the way forward. Smooth I do not recommend, you want this input to be very quick so you can quickly move from leaning back to leaning forward. And gain, I recommend at least 100%. If you want your rider lean to feel quicker, you could increase the gain if you want. Now left right lean, dead zone same. You can see I need to increase my dead zone a little bit. Smooth I would not recommend. You want this input to be very direct to your stick movement. And also having a quick rider lean, it's not gonna affect the bike as much as your normal lean does. So no reason to have smooth. For gain I recommend 100%. Most of the times you're gonna lean backward or forward at the same time as you're leaning left or right. So you want to be able to just lean a little bit to the right. So you don't want to have a high gain, and you don't want to have to move your stick very far, because then you're not gonna lean as much forward. So 100% is highly recommended for this. Yeah, so moving on to input 2. First we have shift up and shift down. The important thing here is that you have your shift buttons bind to a button that are easily accessible, where you don't have to remove your thumb from your stick. So I have my shift on the circle and triangle on my PS4 controller, and I play a claw grip, which is basically I click those buttons with my pointing finger. Starter will start your bike, and you will never have to use that. Push bike is a very good thing to bind. I have that bound on my D-pad, so my arrows up and down. This allows you to push the bike with your feet, and it is really nice to have after you crashed, for example, because the rider are somehow very strong, and you can basically use your push bike to push up almost any hill. So this is very recommended to have bound to something. Sit I have bound to my right stick, clicking the right stick down. So same goes here, have a button that are easy and comfortable to reach without you having to remove your thumbs from your sticks. You can see under sit we have direct. This makes it so if you have this checked, you are only going to sit while you are pressing your sit input. So if you have this checked like this, you have to hold down your sit button for the rider to stay seated. As soon as you let go of the input, your rider are gonna stand up again. if you don't have this checked, like this, when you click the button, your rider is going to sit until you click it again, and then the rider stands up. Having this on basically allows you to be really quick, and it's harder to mess up. Now the downside is that your thumb is gonna be hurting bad most of the times. Because think of it, you're having to hold this through the whole corner while you are turning your stick, if you have it bound to your stick. So there are potential your fingers are going to hurt if you have this checked. This is personal preference, I would say. Like, both works. Having it on gives a little competitive advantage, but in return your fingers may hurt. Dab makes your rider put their foot down, and you're never gonna use this. Reset. This is like reset after you crash. Have this on a easily accessible button. Now, since you have crashed, you don't have to worry about like moving your thumbs. Track marker is basically you hold it in, you set a marker and you click it again to go back to that marker. Have this bound to a button where you don't have anything else bound on your controller. Change view is basically going from first to third person. Look back, I have that bound to my X on my PS4 controller. It's just easy to hit, like I can use the click it like real quick to like look if someone is behind me, like going into a corner or something. Definitely recommended to have bound to your controller. Heading is going to be looking left or right. I have this bound to my D-pad, my arrows. It's just nice to be able to look to the sides on your controller, but it's a button you're not gonna use very much while you're actually driving. It's more like looking to the sides when you are entering a track again. Like maybe you have crashed and you enter again, you look to the sides to see if no one is coming or stuff like that. Tear off removes the dirt from your goggles. Have this bound to a button you don't have anything else bound to, because most of the times you are going to pull your teros like over a jump, and then you don't like necessarily have to have your thumbs on your sticks. For the gestures, like the only thing I have bound is raise arm, and I like barely ever use this. Raise arm is kind of the MX Bike's way to say like sorry or thank you, kind of like on track. But just put this button on a button you don't have anything else bound to. Under input 3 I'm not gonna go through, but if you want you can copy these settings. So moving on to graphics, first we have resolution. Generally you want to put this at the same as your monitor. There are cases if you are really struggling with your PC's performance, you could maybe lower this, but generally same as your monitor. You want to play at full screen, you have 32 bits, I don't think you can change that. Refresh rate you want to have same as your monitor. Refresh rate is basically how often your monitor itself refreshes the image. VSync you should have off. VSync tries to limit your frame rate to the same as your monitor refresh rate. So you basically just capping your FPS. And unless you like really struggle with performance, you should turn this off. Anti-aliasing, I'm not really sure what it does, but I usually have it on off just to save on performance. Screen ratio, use the same as your monitor, or you could just do resolution. Textures, I have size on high just to be able to like see the track very clear. Filtering and anisotropic I have at lowest settings just to save on performance. Lightning is gonna be like moving shadows and reflection and stuff like that. I have that off, also to save on performance. Draw distance, model detail and terrain detail I have on high as well. Once again, just to be able to see the track very clear. And one thing you should keep in mind is model detail. You should put this at high, because I think if you are in a public lobby and you have model detail at something lower, the game can freeze when other people are loading into the server. So just keep that on high if you're gonna play in online servers. 3D grass is the grass that are sticking up from the ground. I have that off again just to save on performance. Same with track screens, I have that off to save with performance. And track screens are basically the screens that you can have to show like a video or something that you usually have in Supercross maps. So moving on to miscellaneous, bandwidth is an important one. You can very generally and simply say that this kind of decides how many and how far away you can see bikes from. I recommend keeping this at medium or high, depending on your PC. You could also go very high if you have a really good PC. Like the only negative I found with having it on medium is that in the start, like sometimes you don't see everyone, so like you can just get hit by someone you can't see. But once the race have gone on for like 1 or 2 laps and people have started moving apart, there should not be any big performance issues even on high. The other important thing is flags. You should have these on both. So you see both the flag that is on the side of your monitor and the people standing like at the side waving the flags. Having it on both just ensures that you actually see a flag somehow. And flags are really important to see when you're racing. Hide names I don't recommend, because if you're, for example, being lapped, so you have the blue flag, you want to be able to see if the person behind you that's coming up is the person who are going to lap you, or if it's just the rider in the place behind you. So just to be able to see like what position people are is very good. So moving on to simulation. Field of view is kind of how zoomed in your game is. So 30 will be zoomed out, and you have more like the classic hot lap supercross guy. Whilst if you move to like 115, you have a more zoomed in camera. If you have a lower FOV, it's gonna look and feel like things are happening slower. While if you move it up, it's gonna feel that you're going faster and things are gonna come at you faster. So if you have a lower FOV, things are gonna appear slower and things are going to feel slower. While if you have a high FOV, you're gonna feel faster, but things are also going to come at you faster. My general recommendation would be to have like 115 to 120, around that. But it's just personal preference. There's no like real advantage. Tilt is going to be how much your camera tilts when you're turning. So if you have a high tilt, your camera is going to turn with you as you're turning. I find that very annoying, so I have it at 0%. But this is personal preference. My recommendation would be to have a lower tilt, just because you don't get the like camera rotation, so it's like easier to see. But that's just my opinion. Pitch, it's how much your camera is going to pitch, so up and down. So just mess around with it and see what fits you best. This is again just personal preference. So down here we have lock to bike. This is going to lock your camera to the bike. So if you do a wheelie, the camera is going to follow and you kind of gonna look up in the sky. I would generally don't recommend this because I don't feel like you get a good feeling for what the bike is doing, and I find it very annoying. My advice would be turn it off. Show HUD is going to show what gear you are in down here in the right corner. Many people use the max HUD for showing that, so that's just personal preference, but it's good to have some indicator on what gear you are in. Show rider stand is going to show a symbol down here showing if your rider is sitting or standing. I would recommend to have this on if you are not playing with direct sitting, just because you can sometimes like mess up, and then you can just look down here and see if you're sitting or standing. So moving on to rider aids. Lean help I don't recommend having on ever, because leaning is the hardest thing in MX bikes, and it's the thing that you have to learn and master to be able to play MX bikes, like used as a basic level. So basically by using lean help, you are learning wrong. And I've talked to people that have used lean help for a while, and they said when they turned it off, they couldn't play the game at all. So don't use lean help. Automatic shift I don't recommend either. I'm pretty sure that does not work very good in this game either. But you want to have control over what gear you are in. Shift help makes it so you don't have to let off the gas when you are shifting, so the game will do that automatically for you. I highly recommend to have this on unless you're using quick shift, and if you don't know what that is, just search on YouTube MX bikes quick shift and you should see plenty of videos, but it only works for the KTM and the Husqvarna. Automatic clutch basically makes it so you don't have to pull in the clutch when you are stopping. Traction help I don't recommend. I had tried it out and it basically just makes you go slow, so don't use that. Brake help, I think it helps you don't lock up the brake, but when I tried it out I did not really see a big difference, so I would just say turn this off. And if you're struggling with like locking up your brake or crashing when you're braking, You can try to instead just lower your gain on your brakes, just like 1 or 2 clicks. Automatic ride lean, I see no reason to use, so have these off. If you're feeling uncomfortable with leaning yourself, if you're a beginner or you're a new player, just play the game without leaning until you got control of all the other movements, and then start leaning. Automatic rider dab makes it so that your rider is going to put the foot down when you are about to stop. This only works at like really slow speed, so you will barely like even notice this. Automatic rider sit, I don't recommend. You want to be able to control when you are sitting, and if you are new or a beginner or something, and you are not comfortable with like sitting, just play the game without sitting until you're comfortable with all the other controls, and then start to learn to sit. Automatic tire change, basically just changes your tires automatically. Yeah, so that will be all for this video. Next video I will go over some like a basic rider technique and stuff like that, like how to like start to go a little faster. Hopefully it won't be like a month like it's been with this video. I've been really lazy. So yeah, just have a good day and subscribe if you want to follow and stuff like that.